Carthage, the wonders of civilization. A city with apartment buildings before it was cool. A city with amazing irrigation systems all around it. With an agriculture system that even the Romans were in awe of it. However, it had a very, very dark secret, my friends, and we are going to get into it. So stay tuned. Carthage was founded in 814 BCE by a group of settlers from the city of Tyre in the Levant. The Romans actually wrote in the Aeneid that it was legendary Queen Dido that settled the city. She ran away from her husband for, I really don't know why, but she did. Now, Carthage grew to be this maritime empire with colonies all over the western Mediterranean. During the Punic Wars of 264 to 146 BCE, the Romans were locked in conflict with the Carthaginians, and this conflict was actually quite costly for both nations. Both nations were completely exhausted after the First Punic War, and they needed arguments to keep the war going or to create new wars. So there was a dark thing in Carthaginian culture that actually pulled the Romans together. Well, to what extent, I don't really know. They were all looking for loot. But there's this one thing that's quite bad. But that didn't stop the Romans and the Greeks from quite admiring some aspects of Carthaginian culture. So, for one, when Carthage was destroyed, there was a 28-volume treatise on agriculture written by a Mago. He was Carthage's father of agriculture that the Romans actually had translated from Punic into Latin. Now, Carthaginian agriculture was quite advanced with advanced irrigation and very strict plotting of land. Around Carthage, by the 3rd or 4th centuries BCE, there was not 1 inch of land that was not filled with some kind of crop, right? So if you were marching down to Carthage, you would see farms all around you. So that is quite impressive, especially in that region of the globe. Regarding politics, Aristotle considered the Carthaginian political system to be formidable because the common folk seemed to live quite content. And he said this because there had never been a revolt or civil strife in Carthage. Now, we don't know if this is quite true, but that is the impressions of a Greek person. Cicero, a Roman, recognized wiseness and formed the ruling classes of Carthage that held power for over 6 centuries. This is saying a lot, and both Greeks and Romans also approved of the Carthaginian tendency of having high-ranking officials, high-ranking politicians to lead their armies and fleets. This was very important for these peoples who were very martial. Greek Sicilian writer Diodoro, however, he writes this about a Carthaginian statue that had its ends spread out, leaning downwards. He writes the following about this statue. The statue had its ends stretched, with its ends leaning downwards, so that, and I am quoting, so that children that were put there would fall into a pit of fire. Now, this is shocking. Why would you throw children down a pit of fire? And is this any true? Because during the Punic Wars, the Romans needed to garner support. After the First Punic War, both nations, Carthage and Romans, were absolutely exhausted from the war. You know, both coffers and manpower were absolutely exhausted, so they needed to garner support. Is this just a PR stunt of the Romans to garner support for the Punic Wars? Well, let's find out. In 1925 at Carthage, archaeologists discovered a sacred enclosure filled with little stones with inscriptions. These inscriptions were in Carthaginian Phoenician, and they were pointing to the location of urns that had infant remains inside, and these infant remains were burned. Alright, I'm being a little bit theatrical here, but it points to suggest that what this Diodoro guy was saying, or was writing, was actually correct. The Carthaginians were burning children, but maybe the children were already dead. These might have been burial urns. Well, other bones from sheep, goats and other herd animals were actually found at these sites. And these sites are actually quite a lot. There are other 10 ancient Carthaginian locations, like Motia in Sicily, where archaeologists found similar situations. There are very, very strong arguments to suggest this in inscriptions on these stones. You know, remember the Phoenician stones that had inscriptions pointing to the urns? There were three Phoenician letters that appear together, and this is quite common. It's an M, L, and K. And this is an inscription that tends to mean sacrifice offering. So I think it's clear that these were sacrificial urns with burned infant remains. It seems like they would actually throw little kids off the hands of a statue into a fiery pit. Maybe it was not that graphic, but they burnt kids alive. And that is scary and quite dark. Anyway, judging by the inscriptions, this was mostly done by men, even though women would do it occasionally as well. They would give their own offspring as offering to their gods. It was a vote of faith or a vote of gratitude that they would do to a certain deity. Now, this was probably only done on very dire situations. At the site at Motia, we can tell by examining the remains that only about 2 to 3 children were sacrificed every single year. Now that's a lot of children to be sacrificed. If the city was 200-300 years, just imagine, that's almost 1,000 children sacrificed in total. That is horrifying. It's a horrifying way to die, to be fairly honest. Now, the practice seems to have come from the Phoenicians that first settled the city in the 9th century BCE. These people came from the Levant, and in the Levant this seems to have been a common practice. You know, the Old Testament tells us that the Canaanites did sacrifice children. You know, Abraham in the Bible, or in the Old Testament actually, sacrifices a kid to prove to God that he's faithful, which seems to me like pretty barbaric, and it seemed to the Romans and the Greeks as well like very barbaric. Still, this didn't stop the Romans and the Greeks from actually admiring the feats of engineering of the Carthaginians, the agricultural feats, their army, their navy, their political system, because their democratic system was quite complex, and that could be the topic of another video entirely, because I can actually spend maybe 10 to 15 minutes explaining it and probably a few hours researching it to tell you how it is. Anyway guys, thank you so much for bearing with me so far. This has been not a very long video, but hopefully a very interesting one, and I hope to see you again in Iberia in some other time. Thank you guys so much for watching. I have been Wolf, and I'll see you on the next time. Peace.